What's up, Guardians? Profane here. Thanks for checking out the video. Today we are taking a look at one of the strongest and dominating Titan builds in Season of Plunder. A perfectly crafted solar build capable of mowing down fleets of adds in any level of combat with an unlimited supply of those amazing and deadly Consecration uppercuts that will absolutely melt anything in your path. This is a build that you can literally take into any game mode of Destiny and absolutely demolish your enemies, champions included. Before we dig into today's build, if you end up enjoying the video and finding it helpful, then please be sure to help support the channel below by hitting that like button, along with the subscribe button if you're new. Both are greatly appreciated. This Titan build features the exotic gauntlets called Syntheseps, which come with the intrinsic perk called Biotic Enhancements. This provides you with increased lunge range, along with improved melee and super damage when surrounded by enemies. This equates out to be a 200% increase to your melee damage and a 50% increase to your super damage for a total of 8 seconds whenever you're surrounded by at least 3 enemies. When in PvP, the melee damage increase is not quite as prolific, only receiving a 100% increase to your melee damage. We are using Consecration with this build, which provides us with a unique ability for Solar Titans that allows you to perform a massively devastating uppercut and slam attack after sliding. When performing the uppercut, you emit a trail of solar damage that scorches and ignites targets caught within its blast. Since we're using the Syntheseps, the increase to the lunge range is quite substantial, giving an additional 7 meters in distance, which can become a very beneficial factor and a key reason why I prefer to use the Syntheseps over top of the Worm God Caress. But with that being said, the Worm God Caress will pair up beautifully with Consecration and the rest of this build. Since this build revolves around the use of our melee, we want to ensure that we'll have a charged melee ability as often as possible, which is why we're going to use a well-based mod setup, starting with Melee Wellmaker. This will provide wells after charged melee final blows. When adding on the solar mod called Bountiful Wells, you'll get 2 wells instead of 1. Adding in the Elemental Charge mod will also give us Charged with Light whenever picking up wells, which we'll need for the main mod for this build, which is Heavy Handed, an exceptionally powerful mod, especially now that Bungie has fixed it, so that it finally works as intended. When charged with light, Heavy Handed provides a 50% boost to your melee ability, consuming 1 stack of Charged with Light in the process. This is a significant return in melee energy, and alongside the other features of this build, it's going to allow us to have our Consecration uppercut at all times. Heavy Handed comes with a secondary perk when surrounded by at least 3 or more enemies. Defeating combatants with fusion rifles, shotguns, sidearms, or SMGs will add ammo for that weapon directly to your reserves. This can become an immensely beneficial perk, especially if you're wielding a shotgun with 1-2 punch. You do have to have an additional arc mod slotted for the secondary effects to take place, which we're pairing it up with an amazing arc class item mod called Outreach. This will reduce our melee cooldown whenever we use our Titan barrier. And for our final primary mod slot, we're using Well of Life, which is going to trigger health regeneration whenever we pick up solar wells, an extremely important mod for any solar build, especially when facing off against more difficult opponents in Master and Grandmaster level activities. Since Consecration will put us in up-close combat, it will be important to apply resistance mods onto your chest piece, like Concussive Dampener, which will reduce area of effect damage. Melee resistance would be another important mod, along with the seasonal Thermoclastic Strike mod, which provides resistance against arc and solar damage. And since we'll be up close and personal with many of our enemies, I find it's important to use the Recuperation mod so that you can get health back every time you pick up an orb, which is a great reason to utilize the Harmonic Siphon mod to be able to create orbs on solar weapon kills. Alternatively, Arc Helmets offer the Hands-On mod, which gives super energy after defeating enemies with your melee attack, which makes for great synergy with Consecration. There's several extremely top-tier weapons that pair beautifully with this build, especially solar weapons that come with Incandescent or 1-2 punch. It's important to remember that when using a weapon that has overload rounds, your enemy's damage output is significantly reduced, something that can provide you with extreme benefits against higher tier enemies, not just overload champions. We'll also be applying the seasonal mod for Focusing Strike, which grants class ability energy when causing damage with a melee attack. And we'll also be using Inferno Whip, another seasonal mod which provides unstoppable abilities to our charged melee attacks. This will become extremely important as you enter high difficulty activities, as Consecration is a magnificent ability to use not only to stun champions, but to flat out melt them. When putting together your armor for this build, it will be important to focus on resilience, as that will help you be more resistant to incoming damage, along with regaining your barrier more quickly. For most activities, maintaining at least 50 resilience is fine, but if you're looking to take on more difficult activities like Grandmaster Nightfalls, you'll need to have at least 70 resilience, if not higher. You'll also want to focus heavily on strength, which will reduce the overall cooldown of your charged melees, which you'll need to perform continuous consecrations, which will then activate Well of Life to keep you alive. And with the mods and armor out of the way, let's take a look at the solar aspects and fragments that you'll need to run with this build, starting with our super. And in all honesty, this is really going to depend on the activity. I prefer to use Burning Maul when in PvP or when facing off against tougher enemies, but both hammers and Burning Maul are exceptionally powerful in most every situation. Grenades are another pick your poison situation. Since this build isn't heavily focusing on grenades, it's really up to you. I prefer using thermite grenades, but there are several strong solar grenade options to choose from, including healing grenades, which can become especially important not only for you, but your teammates when in Grandmaster Nightfalls or raids. We've already covered our first solar aspect, Consecration, so for our second aspect, we're using Soul Invictus. This will create sunspots when defeating enemies with solar abilities. Hammer of Soul impacts and enemies defeated by Scorch will also create sunspots. While standing in your sunspots, your abilities recharge faster, and while standing in a sunspot during your super time duration is extended. You and allies will receive restoration whenever standing in sunspots, but any enemies who step within them will take continuous scorch damage. And considering our Consecration ability will leave the ground scalding in scorched enemies, you can be sure sunspots will be left everywhere. To add to our scorching devastation, we're applying some very spicy fragments, starting with Ember of Searing. Defeating scorched targets grants melee energy. Since we'll be scorching almost every single enemy we attack, this will work wonderfully at restoring melee energy. And considering it comes with a 10-point bump in recovery, it's a hard fragment to pass up on. We're using Ember of Eruption, which gives our scorched ignitions an increased area of effect, which will effectively catch more enemies within the blasts. We'll also be getting a 10-point bump to our strength by using Ember of Eruption. Ember of Torches will give you and your allies radiance whenever using charged melee attacks, which is going to buff weapon damage for you and your allies. And finally, Ember of Ashes, which is going to apply more scorch stacks to targets, causing them to ignite faster and take more overall damage. Alternatively, Ember of Char makes for a great fragment to use with this build. And with that, you've put together an absolutely amazing top tier solar titan build that is super fun and perfect for tearing down enemies in any activity. I highly encourage you all to put this build together for yourselves and let me know how you like it in the comments below. With that being said, it's going to wrap things up for today's video. Thank you as always for stopping by. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and found it helpful. If so, then please be sure to help support the channel below by hitting that like button along with the subscribe button if you're new. Both are greatly appreciated and really do help support the channel. If you're in need of any help throughout this season, maybe with a raid, a dungeon, or any of the new seasonal content, then be sure to check out the Discord link in the description below and join one of the greatest communities in all of Destiny. And until next time, Guardians, this has been Profane, wishing you all some happy hunting.